and my first doctoral dissertation I wrote about Adolf Hitler.
What the people need to be successful in business?
First of all, not all rich people are the same, like not all poor people are the same. They are different. I think it's logical because why are rich people rich? Because if they would do the same thing as everyone else, and they ask people, what do you think about National Socialism, you know, Hitler's system, National Socialism? And the majority, not today, but in the 50s, said in Germany, oh, National Socialism was a good idea. It was only bad implemented. They made some mistakes, like with the war or with the Jewish people. They shouldn't do it. This is crazy.
Dzień dobry Państwu. Naszym gościem jest pan dr Rainer Zitelmann.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Double doctor.
Yes.
Double doctor. So you are a doctor in history and?
Sociology.
Okay, so rather humanistic science, but you are a businessman and you are a multimillionaire, so that's not too often what I can say to meet somebody who is intellectual people, who is intellectual men, because some people from the science, world of science, are usually good in theory, but you are good in business. How it happened?
Yes, I started as a historian. I studied history and politics, and my first doctoral dissertation I wrote about Adolf Hitler and his economic thoughts. And then I was like assistant professor at a university in Berlin. And after this, I was in a leading position of one of the leading German daily newspapers. And then I was only 43 years old. I quit there and I founded my own company. And this was a public relation company focused on the real estate industry. I made a lot of money this time and I invested this money on the Berlin residential real estate market, what was a good time. But I sold the company now 6.5 years ago. So today I'm not longer entrepreneur. Of course, I have my investments, but I sold the company, and now what I'm doing, I do my scientific research. I'm writing my books, every year a new book, and I travel everywhere all over the world because my next book is will be published in 30 languages, and I promised to travel to each country, and I learn a lot about economic situation in this country. I meet interesting people like you now, and of course I promote my books everywhere in the world.
So you write about economy, about social science, about psychology. One of your books was about psychology of successful business people.
Yes.
Because when we see how behave the sport people, we see they need a training, they need some gifts, some talents, they need to join the club, they need to have a good trainer, etc., etc. But what the people need to be successful in business?
Oh, there are a lot of things, and I am interested in this since now maybe 12 years. This stuff. The first thing, I wrote a book that is published right now in Poland. I can't pronounce the Polish title, but it's published now in 13 languages. And this book is I analyzed biographies of 50 successful people. What do they have in common? And then some years later, I even wrote my second doctoral dissertation about this topic. I mentioned my first doctoral dissertation was about Adolf Hitler, and the second one was about the psychology of super rich people, to find out whether there's a connection between personality traits on the one hand and financial success on the other hand. And for this doctoral dissertation, I did interviews with 45 people. Most of them had a net worth between 30 million and 1 billion euros, and most of them were self-made entrepreneurs. And in the end, these were 1,700 pages transcriptions from these interviews, and everyone had to complete a psychological test with 50 questions, or a lot of stuff. So what do they have in common? First of all, not all rich people are the same, like not all poor people are the same. They are different. But you can find some common patterns with these people, what a lot of them have in common. I can mention some of them. For example, a lot of them enjoy swimming against the stream. That means they are nonconformists, like you are, I would guess. People who don't go with the crowd, who even enjoy to be nonconformist. I had an interview with one of the richest people in Germany, a multi-billionaire. He became rich with milk and yogurt, and so he told me, he gave me a funny picture, because his favorite animals are cows, of course, because he became rich with cows. And the picture is like there's a herd of cows going on a path, 100 cows, and on the left side there's a very green and lush field, and on the right hand there's a field that is not as near as lush. There are only some grams of grass left. And he told me 99 out of these 100 cows go to the left side, but what happens, the grass is eaten very fast, and one cow went to the right side. This cow eats and eats and eats, and this was a funny picture. Or another example, I met Jim Rogers. Maybe some people heard about Jim Rogers. He became rich in the 80s because he managed, together with George Soros, the quantum fund, and he made 4,200% in the same time when the S&P index in the United States had only 42%. And so he became rich very early. And he became rich as a contrarian investor. What does it mean, contrarian investors? These are people who enjoy swimming against the stream. So, and he told me this funny story. He was invited in Manhattan evening to a fancy dinner with bankers, investors. Everyone was much older than him. He was the youngest. And then one of these famous bankers, investors, said to his neighbor, not very loud, but so loud that everyone could hear it, "Who could be so stupid to invest in Lockheed funds?" This was this time Lockheed Company. Every day you had bad news about them, and the price of their shares had decreased and dropped, and there were only bad news about this. But it was Jim Rogers, who invested at this time as a contrarian, and everyone knew it, and so everyone laughed. Who could be so stupid to invest? And he said at this time it didn't feel very comfortable because everyone laughed at him. But later he made a lot of money with this investment, and so he said the lesson that I took there: if people laugh at you, you're on the right way, and the louder they laugh, the better it is. Of course, it's not so easy with investments that only if people laugh at you, then you're in the right way. But there is something about nonconformism that is, I know I'm also nonconformist. I was all my life, and sometimes, I think you know it also, it can be difficult in politics and whatever, with media, but sometimes with investment, it's an advantage. This is one thing. Another thing is how to deal with crisis and setbacks. Because if you look at successful people, it's not this way that they were always successful. On the contrary, they had a lot of defeats, setbacks, and were confronted with crisis. But the difference, how do people react? So ordinary people, if they are successful, that they are to his wife, you see, how smart am I? When they are successful. But when they fail, they blame other people or they blame society. it was capitalism, or it was their parents, or whatever. And these people, these rich people, I spoke with them. They were much different. They took always the blame for them. They blamed themselves. So they took responsibility not only for the success, but also for their failure. And I think this is very important. And so there are a lot of things that differences between personality traits of rich people. And I think it's logical, because why are rich people rich? Because if they would do the same thing as everyone else, you can't get rich if you do the same thing as everyone else. You could get some hundreds of millions when you do the same thing as everyone else. So they became rich because they did things, they acted different, and they acted different because they thought different. And so this is the reason why the English title of my book, that was not this book, another book that is published now in Poland, is Dare to be Different and Grow Rich. And this is, I think, good news for all people who are different and who are nonconformists. So sometimes it's not easy in life, but if it is about making money, it can really be an advantage.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I was talking to my friend who is successful in business, and he's probably in your age. His name is Joseph, and I was telling to him my ideas, and I wanted him to judge it as somebody with knowledge, with experience. And what I have noticed later, because he was thinking and telling me, no, it's good idea, it's not good, and I noticed he was accounting a risk. That was very interesting, because I noticed that the business people, successful business people, they usually try to recognize a risk of the business, and they say very quickly, I go this way, don't go that way.
Yes, with risk, of course, this is another thing. In my interviews, I asked all of them if there's a scale, how much risk you want to take. Yeah. From -5, it means somebody absolutely risk averse, like government official, don't take any risk. And +5 means something who really enjoys taking risk. And I asked them, where are you from -5? 0 would mean neutral to +5, and most of them told me I'm +4, +5. Even some told me no, I'm +7 or +8. Mm-hmm. But there was an exception. Everyone said I'm extreme optimist. I gave them another scales from total pessimist -5 to total optimist +5, and most of them were optimists, but not all of them. For example, I was successful as an entrepreneur and investor, but I'm more risk averse. I would position myself maybe +1 or something like this. And I met another one who was for a very long time successful in real estate business, and he was also more like pessimist and more like risk averse. So what it means, on average, these people take a lot of risk, but of course they don't take it like blind. So they don't go over the street with, closing their eyes and hopefully it will happen. Of course they analyze risk, but another important result, they take decisions very often with a gut feeling, intuition. I asked them, there are 2 ways if you make a decision. The first thing is you analyze things like numbers and so, rational, and the other things you listen to your gut feeling, and it's your intuition. And of course, every one of us does both. But I asked them, what is more important for you, gut feeling or this analysis? And most of them told me it's gut feeling. But gut feeling is not something that is irrational. So it's something, I have to explain it, in psychology we distinguish between explicit learning and implicit learning. What does it mean? Explicit learning, it's like learning at school or university, reading some books, and so explicit learning, academic learning. Implicit learning is like learning by learning by doing, or sometimes you're not aware that you learn something. And implicit learning was much more important for these successful people. And how did they learn? I asked them, for example, how was your performance at school or university? Did you belong to the good one or to the best? There was absolutely no correlation between their performance at school and university on the one hand and their later financial success on the other hand. Some were very good at school, some were very, very bad at school or university. What was much more important, what they did outside school, alongside school. For example, half of them were competitive athletes. This was very important. A lot of them were competitive athletes. So it means they learned how to win, and more important, they learned how to deal with defeat and with setbacks. I spoke about this before. They learned it as competitive athletes. And another thing, what was really important, I asked them, did you earn money alongside school or university? And most of them did things to earn money when they were at school or university, but not for an hourly wage. Like most people, when I was a student, there were some taxi driver or some worked even in a factory or whatever. These were things that they didn't do. They started like small business, or they were very active in sales. There were a lot of salespeople. Some sold like insurance policies or shares in a real estate investment fund, or they sold used cars or used motorcycles or whatever. They had a lot of ideas what things to sell. And this was another point, that the ability to sell, knowledge to how to sell things are very important. Not only to sell products or to sell service, but one of them told me everything is sales. If you want to convince a new employee to come to your company, it's sales. You sell the idea of company to him. Or if you go to government officials to convince him to get a permission for something, it's sales in this way. You have to convince people, and you have to have pleasure maybe to turn a no in a yes and so on. This is what sales means. So they had a lot of things in common.
Mm-hmm. You came to Poland from Germany, and that's a very interesting country. I'll tell you why. Because Germany was the state separated into two parts, Western and Eastern Germany. Western was capitalistic, and there was a socialism in Eastern Germany. So I remember that even when Germany became one state again, there were big differences between the people from East and West, between zwischen Wessis und Ossis, like the people in Germany say. So it shows that political system, economical system has a huge impact, because the same people from the same nation, people from the same area, the Europeans, they lived about 44 years in different economical and political systems, and their minds have been changed.
Sure, this is, by the way, one chapter in this book. I compare East and West Germany. I have other chapters. I compare, for example, South and North Korea. It's the same story.
Yes. And
it's interesting because, as you mentioned, the same history, the same culture, the same language, only totally different economic and political systems. And these are things that you can compare, because the problem with socialists, they like to compare their vision of a perfect society, utopia that was never realized in history, but they have it in their book, and then they compare this with real life capitalism. And I think this is unfair. It would be the same. I don't know, are you married, sir?
No.
Okay, well, maybe you have a relationship, and if I would compare your relationship with a woman, for example, to a romantic love novel, then I say, oh, you have a very bad relationship because it is not as it is described here in this romantic love story. But
it's like in a commercial. You watch the commercial on TV, everything is beautiful, everything is sweet, but in real life it doesn't look.
This is what socialists what socialists do, and I have a different approach. I compare things that you can compare here in this book. For example, Chile and Venezuela, North Korea, South Korea, East, West Germany, or China in Mao's time, China today. These are things that you can compare. And for East-West Germany, you can see there are a lot of things that people don't know. I give you some examples because I just produced a film about it. The film, everyone can watch it on the internet. It's a Life Behind the Berlin Wall, if you Google it. And I'm proud because I come from Las Vegas from Freedom Fest, and we got an award for this film there. And I have some stories. You can see more in the film. For example, I asked people, what do you think how long you had to wait for a car in Germany, in East Germany? And if I ask people, they say, well, it seems long, maybe half year, 6 months. Or was it 8 months? I said, no, it was between 12 and 17 years that you had to wait for a car. People don't know it. They haven't heard it in school. They're surprised. And then I asked them, what do you think how many people in East Germany had a telephone? I don't speak about mobile phones. There were no mobile phones at this time, but a telephone. And yes, it was only 16 or 17% in East Germany. In West Germany, it was 99%. Or the last example, with your own toilet in your apartment. 27% of people in East Germany had not their own toilet in their apartment. In West Germany, it was less than 1%, almost everyone had. So I think this is fair to compare. And with the environment, a lot of people think capitalism is to blame for environmental destruction, for climate change, but the truth is things were much worse in East Germany with the environment than it was in West Germany. The same in Poland.
Yes, I've seen that film, and it was exactly the same we had in Poland.
Yes, the same things. The situation was worse, but people blame capitalism for this. They blame private capitalist firms who look for profit, but there were no private owned companies looking for profit in socialism. So why is that it was worse? They can't explain it. So this is something that, and even today we have difference between East and West. I commissioned a lot of polls, for example, about the image of capitalism and free market. And the bad thing is, to be honest, that in East Germany, people are more anti-capitalistic, and a lot of them, even they will tell you, okay, we didn't like the system as it was in GDR, but the idea of socialism was great. It was only not perfect implemented, but the idea was good. This is something that a lot of people tell you in East Germany. And we had similar polls after Second World War in Germany in the 50s. And they asked people, what do you think about National Socialism, Hitler's system, National Socialism? And the majority, not today, but in the 50s, said in Germany, oh, National Socialism was a good idea. It was only bad implemented. They made some mistakes, like with the war or with the Jewish people. They shouldn't do it. This is crazy.
Like till today, even in Poland, some older people say they wanted to be good, but people build the socialism, and that's the result. So it's everywhere the same.
Yes, the idea is bad, and this is what people don't understand. I give you maybe a funnier example. Imagine a housewife who bakes a cake, and she invites guests Saturday evening, but the guests get sick, even they have to vomit. Okay, she understands something was not okay with the recipe. I have to change a little bit, slight modification. Next Saturday, she bakes another cake, but with slight modification, because she understood something was not. What happens? She invites guests get sick again, vomit. So, next Saturday, she makes another cake. She understood, okay, there was something wrong with I have to change something with the recipe. She takes some new ingredients, but what happens? People vomit again. And this woman, this housewife, imagine she does it 24 times to take the same recipe with some slight, and we'll tell you, stop, this is a crazy story. This is fantasy. There's no housewife in the world who would be as crazy as this. Of course, true. But socialists did exactly the same. They used the same recipe with some modifications. In China, in a different way as in Poland. In Hungary, in a different way than in Russia. In Cuba, in a different way than in Vietnam, or in North Korea, or in East Germany. So it was, they tried it so many times, but they failed all times. In 100 years, it's the same as with a housewife. And they thought the recipe is okay, we only have to do it in a little bit different way. No, the recipe is wrong, but I don't know why socialists don't learn it. The last example was Venezuela. I remember the end of the 90s, 1999, when Hugo Chavez came to power. All socialists and intellectuals in the world were absolutely enthusiastic about it. Oh, this is 21st century socialism. And they had waited for this because I think North Korea wouldn't be such a great example to inspire people that you are living. So now they were happy. Now it was socialism 21st century. And in the first years, it seemed to work because Hugo Chavez had good luck because the oil price went up, I think, 10 times more then. And so he had a lot of money to spread it everywhere for social things. Even he started to support workers in the United States, in Chicago. He had a lot of money. But it was not because of his system, but because of the development of oil price. And you know, Venezuela, I think there's maybe only one country in the world that has so much oil as Venezuela. And they depend very much on it. But then the oil price dropped. And he started to do all this nationalization and what socialists do when they govern. And what happened? We know the end of the story. We had inflation in Venezuela some years ago, 1 million%. I think in Poland you have 16, what is a lot today. In Germany we have 8, also a lot. But they had 1 billion%. Yes. And then 10% of the people fled from Venezuela. They had hunger. Then they started to take political freedoms away, to oppress people, forbid demonstration and so, and destroy democracy in Venezuela. And then, when you asked people who praised Hugo Chavez in Venezuela only a few years before, and you confronted them, you said socialism failed again. You see it. It happens like always. Oh, no, this wasn't real socialism. This wasn't socialism. And they did it all times. First, even intellectuals were enthusiastic about Stalin at this time. A lot of famous intellectuals, like especially French, of course, because French are the most anti-capitalist people in the world. And like Sartre and these people were enthusiastic about Soviet Union and even about Stalin. But when it failed, they told you, oh no, this was Stalinism, this was not true socialism.
Mass murder, etc.
Well, yes, with Mao it was the same. They were enthusiastic about Mao, cultural revolution, and so after it failed. Yes.
Very often in Western universities. That's very interesting.
Yes.
Because what I have noticed that was in Poland when the socialists have bankrupt because end of socialism is bankruptcy. Like some people say, socialists need somebody's money to spend.
Yes.
And
Maggie Thatcher said it. Yes.
That's it. And what I noticed that when the borders were open before 1989, when it was going, old system was going down, and there was a wind of change, as we remember, and some people started to go to the West to visit friends or family who migrated in earlier ages. And so I was about 12, 13 years old, and I was listening what my neighbors say. And it was for me interesting because some of them were telling the welfare state in the West is very good. You know, the people, for the people who were born in socialism in Poland, for the people who were born, for example, in 50s, and when it collapsed, they had about 30, 40 years old. When they came to Germany, they said, oh, it's beautiful system, welfare state, because in Germany, even an employee doesn't have to work. Government give him money, he doesn't work, and he can collect money for holidays.
Yes.
That's a beautiful system. You know, they didn't understand it's immoral to live for somebody's money. For them, it was a good system because government gives money for free, and I think it is the main problem of people who were born in socialism. But when we see the situation of Europe now, the more of socialism goes from the West, from Brussels, from EU organization and institutions.
Yes, this is a big problem. It's not only in Europe, it's everywhere in the world right now. If you compare, for example, the situation in the 80s. In the 80s, we had, you know, at the end of the 80s, we had this end of socialism in Soviet Union, and so we had in China starting pro-market reforms by Deng Xiaoping. The first chapter here in this book is about what a lot of people don't know, what happened in China with the great leap forward in the end of the 50s when 45 million people died. I tell the story here. But after this, when economic reforms started with introducing private property, more free market elements, and this was great because 1981, 88% of people in China lived in extreme poverty. Today it's less than 1%. It was only because they introduced some elements of market and private property. And there we had Maggie Thatcher in the UK. In the 70s, they called the UK the sick man of Europe. It was a total disaster there, what happened there, because of what they called democratic socialism, but it was a disaster what happened there. Then they made the economic reforms and the situation became better. In the United States, the same with Ronald Reagan. And we had here in Poland with Balcerowicz the economic reforms. I don't have to tell you, you know much better than me that Poland was one of the poorest countries in Europe this time. And now I read a book with the title Europe's Growth Champion. And this is about Poland, what happened in the last 25 years. So this was the 80s, and today we have exactly the other way around. If I start with China, Xi Jinping, there's less economic freedom now. If you look at the ranking of the Heritage Foundation Index of Economic Freedom, China lost 10 points last year. The United States, they had the worst ranking in the Index of Economic Freedom since they started, and this was in 1995, the worst ranking. So they go back more socialism. And this is also true in Europe, for example. Germany, where I come from, we became successful with Ludwig Erhard and the market economy. What he did, this was the reason Germany became successful. And then we had some problems in the end of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s, and then we had Gerhard Schröder, who today I really hate him for what he did with Russia, and so he's on payroll of Putin. But at this time, as a chancellor, in spite of being social democrat, he made good economic reforms, reducing taxes, liberalization of labor market, and what happened? Situation became better. Even in countries as Sweden or in Argentina, in the 90s, they had some liberal economic reforms. And today, it's all the other way around. Everywhere where you look in the world, it's not only in Europe, but also, of course, it's in Germany. We have a strong tendency. People believe in the state. We have the strong Green Party there in Germany, and the state is like their god. They believe everything is good what the state does in the economy. And we have this in Brussels, of course. They develop more and more in the direction to a planned economy, and planned economy failed always. Take an example with automobile industry, what is very important for Germany, and we are famous all over the world for our Mercedes and BMW and so on. Now they started to tell the companies what kind of cars they should produce. But this is a socialist ideas. In capitalism, consumer decide and entrepreneur decide. And now politicians decide, government officials tell them, you have to produce this and this and that. And we have now in Germany, we got a lot of problems with energy now. We will have maybe a hard winter, a lot of really hard problems. But why is that? Was it the fault of capitalism? No, it was the fault of politicians, because they decided to phase out nuclear energy first. Crazy idea. It was not the idea of capitalists or capitalist firms. They would have liked to run. They decided to phase out. Then they decided to phase out coal energy as well. Then they forbid fracking. Fracking is not allowed in Germany. And then they made us, the end, very crazy, totally dependent on Russian gas in the end. And now we have the problems. So, but these are not problems caused. A lot of socialists they like to tell always about failure of the market. This is where they tell. I would like to speak about failure of politics, failure of government, failure of the state, because this is what I see. Everywhere, look at the pandemic with Corona. We have a lot of different examples how government reacted, but I see nowhere that it was a really smart way to react there. Maybe in South Korea, I don't know, so maybe they did a little bit better, but as we did it in Germany, or I think also in Poland, or in the United States, or in Russia and in China, everywhere you see, it's crazy. But what was good? Private companies, capitalism. They produced the masks they produced very fast this corona tests that you know whether you are infected or not. They produced the vaccines and everything. So this was private capitalism that worked, and state government that didn't work. So I prefer to speak not about failure of market, I prefer to speak about failure of government.
Oh yeah. And about this problem and many other, you can read in this book about capitalism, written by our today's guest, double doctor Rainer Zitelmann.
And I'm very proud because the preface for this book is written by Balcerowicz, and so. And I think what he did was so very important for Poland, because without him and his economic reforms, Poland wouldn't be there where it is today. And so I was very proud that he wrote the preface to this book.
Okay, thank you very much. It was very nice to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you.